it is related to tier 1 and tier 2 capital. It is related to the tier 1 and tier 2 capital. So an Indian bank calculated the capital adequacy ratio. So the capital adequacy ratio calculated by an Indian bank are given as below. So common equity tier 1 capital for the CCB, PNC, PS, PDI, tier 2 capital, total capital available are given over there. And as per the Basel III rules for the Reserve Bank of India for the purpose of reporting of the tier 1 capital, CRAR may access additional tier 1 capital and further tier 2 capital will be recognized in the same proportion as that applicable towards the minimum capital requirements. Okay, and further at minimum 9% of the total capital is to be maintained. The maximum 81 can be 1.5% and the tier 2 can be maximum 2%. So as per the Reserve Bank of India, what are the different capital ratios that are to be maintained? Let me tell you that the capital is further divided into two categories, tier 1 capital and further the tier 2 capital. If you remember, in the tier 1 we are having the two components. One, it is related to the CET1, that is a common equity tier 1 capital, and second one, it is related to additional tier 1 capital. For additional tier 1, the maximum percentage is 1.5%. It is confined to 1.5%, whereas for the CET1, as per the international standard, it is prescribed to be 4.5%, but as per the Indian regulator, it is 5.5%. Is that clear? And this one is a minimum percentage. This one is a minimum percentage, not the maximum one. And further for the tier 2, the prescribed percentage by the BCBS and the regulator is 2%. It is a 2%. So the minimum capital requirement, that is a minimum CAR, it would be basically we can calculate it to be 5.5 plus 1.5, that is equal to 7 plus 2, that is 9%. That is all mentioned over here in this particular paragraph. Okay, so this one is to be calculated as, these two are to be calculated as a maximum percentage, and further the CET1 is the minimum percentage that is given over there. Okay, so we have already been provided with the that CET1 is 8.5% of the risk weighted assets. CCB, that is a capital conservation buffer, is 2.5% of the risk weighted asset. So I already told you related to the CCB that it is the additional capital that you are maintaining as a bank when you are going through the normal scenarios. When there will be an event of stress, in that particular case, it will be an extra cushion. It will be an extra cushion, and Reserve Bank of India guided the bank so as to maintain it in 4 tranches. So the 4 tranches of 0.625. So RBI never said that you are to maintain the CCB straightforwardly to be 2.5%. It is prescribed as 2.5%. Okay, CCB is prescribed to be 2.5%, and RBI said that you are to maintain 4 tranches of 0.625%, and further that will basically make it to be 2.5%. Is that clear? And next it is related to the PNCPS, that is perpetual non-cumulative preference shares, or the PDI, or that is a debt instruments. Okay, so in the case PNCPS or PDI, these basically form the component related to additional tier 1. These are the components related to the additional tier 1, and also the surplus from the additional tier 1 goes to the tier 2 capital. Okay, so that is basically the concept related to it, and further you must be keeping this particular thing in mind while we will be solving the questions related to it. Tier 2 capital, further off, it is given to be 2.5% of the risk weighted assets, and the total capital available is 17% of the risk weighted assets. Is that clear? Okay, so now we will be working for the first question, and the first question over here, it says what is the total capital, that is a CET1 capital. So you need to answer the question at the earliest, that what would be the CET1 capital. So you need to answer at the earliest that what would be the CET1 capital. So as we know that CET1 over here is given to be what? CET1 over here is given to be 8.5%. Okay, it is clearly given in the question itself, under the table given over here. And also the CCB, that is a capital conservation buffer, is maintained in the form of the tier 1 capital. So it will be 2.5. So the total it will be 11%. So we can say the total CET1 capital is 11%. So one, it is maintained as a CET, that is common equity tier 1 capital, and the other one, it is maintained in the form of the CCB, that is a capital conservation buffer. So let me tell you, the capital conservation buffer is to be maintained in the form of the tier 1 capital, and further that is a common equity tier 1 capital. So the components related to the CCB would be related to the components of the common equity tier 1 capital, and this was clearly asked in the question that we need to tell the total CET1 capital that will basically amount to the CET1 that is we are maintaining as a bank, 8.5% of the risk weighted assets, and also we will be adding up the CCB because CCB is also maintained as the components of the CET1. Okay, so it will be amounting to the it will basically amount to what? It will amount to 11%. So our answer over here will be 11%. Okay, for the question number 1, the answer over here will be 11%. Okay. Next question over here, it says, what is the amount of PNCPS or PDI eligible for Tier 1 capital? What is the amount of the PNCPS, that is a perpetual non-cumulative preference shares, and the PDI eligible for the Tier 1 capital? We need to answer the question relatedly that in the case of the Tier 1 capital, what amount of the PNCPS would be eligible over there? Now the PNCPS amount is given to be 3.5% of the risk weight asset. It is given to be 3.5% of the risk weight asset. And let me tell you one thing. That in the case of Tier 1 capital, we are having the two components. One, it is a CET1 capital, and further PNCPS are not the part of CET1 capital. That is we are already aware of, because we have already gone through the videos related to that, and further I told you clearly that PNCPS is a component related to the additional Tier 1, and if there any surplus arises, that goes to the Tier 2 capital. Is that clear? So CET1 is not related to that. So in the case of Tier 1, the PNCPS will amount to those only particular amount that can be eligible for the additional Tier 1 capital. That can be a component of the additional Tier 1 capital. That is basically 1.5%. That is basically maximum limited to 1.5% now. Is that clear? So if we want to calculate the percentage of the PNCPS which is basically eligible for the Tier 1 capital, that can be basically maximum of 1.5%, because for additional Tier 1 the maximum percentage that the additional Tier 1 can be maintained, it is 1.5% of the total capital except that of the CET1 capital. So whatsoever the different components other than that of the that of the CET1, that will be basically related to what? That will be related to the additional Tier 1. So it will be the total capital is over here given over here, that is 17%, and the CET1 is given to be 8.5%. So we need to calculate the additional Tier 1 from the other capital which is available. So we will be considering it as that 17% minus the 8.5%, and that will be 8.5%, and that will be 8.5%. And further we can calculate the composition of the PNCPS eligible for the Tier 1 capital as 1.5, because it is the additional Tier 1 capital only which will be basically using the components of the PNCPS. Okay, so 1.5 divided by the component related to the PNCPS, that is 3.5%. And also, as I already told you, that the PNCPS also forms a component related to Tier 2 capital. So that also goes over there. That is 2.5 will be added up to it. 2.5 will be added up to it. Did you get it? Did you get this particular point? That in case of numerator, we are basically having 1.5. Why? Because we are over here, we need to calculate the eligible Tier 1 capital out of the PNCPS. Okay, so in Tier 1, we are having the two capital, that is CET1 and additional Tier 1. We know that PNCPS does not form any part of the CET1. So we will be basically taking the additional Tier 1 capital composition, that is basically limited to maximum of 1.5%. Okay, so it is 1.5 divided by, now the PNCPS can be a component of the component that is PNCPS provided for, and also Tier 2 capital components may be related to the Tier 2 capital also. So we will be basically taking a component out of it. So okay, so it will be 1.5 divided by 3.5 plus 2.5 and multiplied by 8.5, because basically we are not basically going to calculate it from the CET1 na. So it will be total capital minus the CET1 capital, that is 8.5% given over here. So we will be calculating it as such. Okay, so it will basically say, using the simple calculator which is allowed in the exam itself, we can find it out as 1.5 divided by 6 multiplied by 8.5, and that is basically what? That is basically 2.125. So we can basically say the additional Tier 1 capital component piece. So we can say the amount of PNCPS which is eligible for Tier 1. So let me write it over here as such. So it will be what? It will be 2.125. So that would be the answer related to it. That is 2.125% would be the answer. It would be the answer related to it. Is that clear? Okay. So 2.125% can be the component of the PNCPS related to the Tier 1 capital. Okay. Now let's move to the third question. Okay. So the third question over here, it says, what is the amount of PNCPS or PDI not eligible for tier 1 capital? What is the amount of PNCPS or PDI not eligible for the tier 1 capital? I want you all to answer this particular question. I want you all to answer this particular question, that what particular amount will not be the component of the tier 1 capital over here. So kindly please do answer at the earliest. Kindly please do answer at the earliest related to the question number 3, that which component would not be the part of the PNCPS under tier 1 capital. So the maximum percentage is already given over here. So the maximum percentage of the PNCPS is given to be 3.5%. And we have already calculated that the composition of the part of the PNCPS which is eligible for the tier 1, that is 2.125. So simply we need to subtract it and we will get the idea related to the composition of PNCPS which is not eligible for the tier 1 capital. So it will be 3.5 minus 2.125, and that is basically 1.375. So out of this, 1.375 is not eligible for the tier 1. It is not eligible for the tier 1, and that is related to the question number 3 over here. Is that clear? Okay. So now let's move to the next question, that is a question number 4. And further, the question number 4 says, what is the amount of tier 2 eligible for CRAR? What is the amount of a tier 2 capital eligible for CRAR? So CRAR for the tier 2 capital, what is the maximum composition of tier 2 capital? That is 2%. So it is already given in the question itself that the tier 2 can be maximum of 2%. So the maximum percentage of the tier 2 can be 2%. Okay, so how we can calculate it for the CRAR? Simply we need to do what? Basically the component which will be forming the part of the tier 2 capital would be from the PNCPS or PDI. So it will be either the 2.5% from the tier 2 capital, or it would be some of the component from the PNCPS. Okay, so we will be calculating it as 2%, that is the maximum composition of the tier 2 capital in the CRAR, divided by the 2.5% of the tier 2 capital itself, that is given to be 2.5%, plus 3.5%, that is from the PNCPS, because a part of the PNCPS can also form the component of the tier 2 capital, and multiplied by the 8.5%. Why we multiplied it by 8.5%? Because the CET1 component ratio is given to be it is given to be what? It is given to be 8.5%, and rest of the capital will come from the 17% minus the CET1 capital, that is 17 minus 8.5%. So we will be multiplying it with that 8.5% over here. That is what we need to calculate over here, and we can basically find out the answer over here. So it will be 2 divided by 2.5 plus 3.5, that is equal to 6, and multiplied by 8.5, that will amount to 2.833. That will amount to 2.833. Okay, now let me tell you one thing. Now out of this 2.833%, out of this 2.833% that we calculated, 2.5% of the capital is maintained as of that risk weight asset is to be maintained, and further the rest would come from the PNCPS. The rest part will come from the additional composition of the PNCPS. We have already calculated what we just calculated, that the PNCPS components which will be eligible for the additional tier 1, that we calculated it to be 2.125%. 2.125% out of 3.5%. And the surplus from the PNCPS was 1.375, that we have already calculated. I just wrote it over there, that is 1.375. Now out of this particular 1.375, the component which is going to be used in the tier 2 capital, that would be basically 2.833 minus 2%. 2.833 minus 2.5%, that is 0.33. So 0.33% component would be utilized from the this surplus itself. It will be utilized from this surplus itself. Is that clear? Okay. Next question over here, it says that what is the amount of PNCPS or PDI eligible for the tier 2 capital? So what is the amount that is eligible for the tier 2 capital? So that is the answer over here that we have already calculated, that is the surplus that we needed to calculate the surplus over here. Okay, so the question number 5, it says what is the amount of PNCPS or PDI eligible for the tier 2 capital? What is the amount of PNCPS or PDI eligible for the tier 2 capital? And I already told you that the surplus can be utilized as a part of tier 2 capital, and further we calculated the surplus as 3.5% and minus 2.125%, and there comes the answer, that is 1.375%, that we have already calculated for the question number 5 over here. So that would be related to the question number 5 over here. And further, the next question, the 6th one, it says what is the amount of PNCPS or PDI not eligible for the tier 2 capital? Kindly please do answer at the earliest. What amount is not eligible for the PNCPS or PDI capital under the tier 2, which is not eligible for the PNCPS or PDI capital under tier 2 capital? Kindly do answer at the earliest. So what particular capital is not eligible for tier 2 capital? We have already calculated the surplus, and the surplus came out to be 1.375%. It came out to be 1.375%, and I already told you out of the tier 2 capital, which is mentioned to be here. Let me just navigate to the table over here. It is given to be 2.5%. It is given to be what? It is given to be 2.5%. And also I told you that out of this tier 2 capital, the amount which is eligible is 2.833. Now for this particular part, the bank is maintaining the composition to be 2.5%. Bank is already maintaining as given in the question itself. And further, the rest of the part will be taken from the surplus. That is a 0.33% part will be taken from the surplus, and the part which will not be utilized and the part which will not be eligible for the tier 2 capital from the PNCPS or PDI, that would be how much? That would be that would be basically 1.375%. That was a surplus minus the 0.33, because this particular part is utilized for the tier 2 and the other one will not be used, because that would be an exceeding part, that would be an exceeding value, so we will not be utilizing that particular value over and above the 0.33. so it will be 1.375 minus 0.3333, so answer comes out to be 1.042. So 1.042 percentage of the PNCPS or PDI will not be utilized for tier 2 capital and will not be eligible for the tier 2 capital. Is that clear? So that is related to this particular thing. So we just calculated the additional tier to be 2.125. We calculated the tier 2 capital to be 2.8333. That is what we calculated. Okay. And the question number 7, that is the last question for this case study. That is the last question for this case study. It goes like, it says what is the total amount of the eligible capital? So what would be the total amount of the eligible capital? So kindly please do answer at the earliest. So we have already calculated all the capitals over here, and further we need to tell what would be the total amount of the eligible capital. So it would be what? It would be the CET1. It would be the CET1. And further it would be the additional tier 1 capital. Further it would be what? It would be the tier 2 capital, and further it would be the CCB that we are maintaining. So that is also an eligible capital that we need to maintain. So CET1, it is a maximum that you need to take. So we need not to solve it particularly for the CET1. So it will be taken as it is, that is 8.5%. It will be taken as it is, that is 8.5%. And further additional tier 1 capital that we calculated to be 2.125%, and further the tier 2 capital would be 2.833%, and further the CCB that is given to be 2.5% over here. That is basically 2.5% over here, and we need to add them up all. So it will be, the answer would be equal to 8.5 plus 2.125 plus 2.833 plus 2.5. So it comes out to be 15.958. So the eligible capital percentage is 15.958 out of the total capital of 17%. Is that clear? So that is how we can do calculate the questions related to the tier 1 capital and the tier 2 capital if given to you in percentage format. Kindly please do confirm if the concepts are clear to you. Okay. And further we are moving to next case study over here, that is related to capital for the market risk. That is related to capital for the market risk. So we are provided over here with the different components like CET1, CCB, total amount of PNCPS PDI, eligible PNCPS PDI additional tier 1, eligible tier 1 capital, tier 2 capital available, eligible, all the components are given over here. And we need to calculate the answers based upon this particular information. So question number 1, it says, what is the minimum CET1 capital to support the credit and operational risk? What is the minimum CET1 capital required so as to support the credit and operational risk? So for the credit and operational risk, we need to calculate the CET1. So what is the minimum percentage of the CET1? Minimum percentage of the CET1 as per the Indian regulator, it is a 5.5%. It is what? It is a 5.5%. Okay. So it will be 5.5%, and further, if it is specifically given in the question that it's an international bank, in that particular case, you will be considering the CET1 component to be 4.5% as prescribed by the BCBS. But if nothing is mentioned or mentioned that Indian bank is there, in that particular case, we will take it to be 5.5% as prescribed by the Indian regulator. Is that clear? So it is 5.5% of what? It is 5.5% of the risk-weighted assets. Now, if you look at the table clearly, it is given over here that credit and operational risk-weighted assets are given to be 1200. These are given to be 1200. So the minimum CET1, because this one is a minimum percentage for the additional tier 1 and the tier 2 capital, that there is a maximum percentage, but over here it is a minimum percentage. So it will be 5.5% of the risk-weighted assets related to the credit and operational risk, that is a 1200. So it will be 5.5% of the 1200, and that would be the answer related to it. And that would be the answer related to it. That what is the minimum CET1 capital? It is 5.5 into 1200%, and that would be the answer, that is 66. So 1200 into 5.5%, that is a 66. So the capital that is to be maintained for the operational risk, let me write it over here. I'll be just writing the details over here because this particular data will be used further in the question itself. So we can say capital for operational risk and credit risk, we calculated it to be 66. We calculated it to be 66, and this is what we calculated. We calculated the CET1. We just calculated the CET1 over here. Okay. And further, let's now move to the next question. Let's move to the next question, which is related to what? We need to calculate the maximum additional tier 1 capital to support the operational risk and credit risk. So the second question, it says we need to calculate the maximum additional tier 1. We need to calculate the maximum additional tier 1 so as to support the credit and operational risk. What it would be? What it would be? So what is the percentage of additional tier 1? It is 1.5%. And again, we need to calculate the capital for the credit and operational risk. So it would be what? It would be 1.5% of the risk-weighted assets again. So what are the risk-weighted assets? These are again 1200, clearly given over here in the question itself. Okay, so 1.5% of the 1200, so it is 1200 into 1.5%, and that is, 1200 into 1.5%, and that it comes out to be 18. So here it comes out to be 18. So additional tier 1 that is to be maintained for the operational and credit risk, that comes out to be 18, and Nilima has already given the right answer related to it. So it is the 18 over here. It is a 18 over here that is related to the capital which is to be maintained for the credit and operational risk. And further, the next question it is related to what is the maximum tier 2 capital to support the credit and operational risk. We need to calculate the maximum tier 2 capital. Again, the maximum tier 2 capital is basically restricted to what percentage? It is restricted to 2%. Even if you have the basics related to it, you can easily do calculate the same. So it is 2% into 1200, again the same risk-weighted assets, and further the tier 2 capital, it would be equal to 24. 1% is equal to 12 and the 2% would be equal to 24. Very right, Nilima. The right answer is 24 over here. Right answer is a 24 over here. Okay, so now let's move to the another question. Third question we have already solved the question related. Fourth question says, what is the amount of total capital to support credit and operational risk required? What is the amount of total capital required so as to support the credit and operational risk? So we will be just taking a total for these, and that will be basically 24 plus 18. So 24 plus 18 plus 66, and that would be the answer, that the total capital required for supporting the credit and operational risk, that will be 108. That would be 108. The capital is required for the same. Next it says, what is the CET1 required for supporting the market risk? What is a CET1 required for supporting the market risk? Kindly please do answer at the earliest. What is a CET1 required for the market risk? So let me tell you one thing. So in the case, whenever we need to calculate the CET1, this is the minimum percentage that we calculate. That is the minimum percentage that we calculate. And over here, they have not asked for the minimum percentage. Over here, they have not asked for the minimum percentage. They have simply asked for the CET1. What is the CET1 required for the market risk? It is a 5.5%. The minimum one is 5.5%. But we need not to calculate the 5.5%. Okay. So first of all, we will be looking at the factor. What is the 5.5%? What is the 5.5% of the CET1 over here? So the CET1 over here is given to be 85. So CET1 over here is basically the risk weight assets for the over here are given to be 100 over here. Okay. So for the market risk, the risk weight assets for the market risk are given to be 100 at the very last over here. Okay. These are given to be 100. So as per that, particularly we can say the minimum CET1 would be, the minimum level of the CET1 can be maintained at 5.5%. But that is a minimum value that we will be maintaining. And so as to get the right answer, we will be doing what? Because CET1 that we are having right now, it is basically 85. And what is the minimum CET1 that was required for capturing the credit risk and operational risk? That was 66 as we calculated over here. Okay. So the answer here would be 85 minus 66. It would be 85 minus 66. That is 85 minus 66. That is 19. So 19 over here would be the right answer. So we can say the CET1 over here for market risk. For market risk, it is a 19. So 19 would be the right answer in this particular case. It is not 5.5. You need to look into the factor that a CET1, it is not the minimum percentage that they have asked for. They have simply asked for the CET1 itself. Okay, so we will be doing what? We will be subtracting the capital CET1 that was to be maintained for the, so the CET1 which was to be maintained for the operational risk and the credit risk, that we calculated it to be 66, that we calculated for the total CET1 available. Total CET1 available with us is 85. So we subtracted 85 minus 66, that is the 19. So if they have asked for the minimum CET1 required for the market risk, then we must have calculated it as 5.5% of the 100. Then in that particular case, we must have calculated it as 5.5% of the 100, and the answer should have been 5.5. But in this particular case, they have not asked for the minimum percentage. Okay, and the percentage prescribed by the BCBS or by the Indian regulator is the minimum percentage. Okay, so they have not asked for the minimum percentage. So the whatsoever the capital we are left with would be the answer related to the capital to be required for the CET1 required for the market risk. Is that clear? Okay. So CET1 for market risk, it comes out to be 19. And further it is related to the next question that says, what is the AT1 to support the market risk? What is the additional tier 1 required to support the market risk? What is the additional tier 1 for capturing the market risk? So additional tier 1 over here, if you remember, additional tier 1 over here, that we calculated it for the supporting the operational risk and credit risk to be 18. We have already calculated it to be 18 over here. And for the eligible PNCPS and PDI, the eligible PNCPS and PDI for the additional tier 1 given are to be 21.25. And out of these, the maintained are already 18. 18 have already been maintained. And further the left out, we are only left with 3.25 capital ratio, or 3.25 of the additional tier 1, eligible components. Okay, so the eligible components we are left with is 3.25. But the level of additional tier 1, they have asked for what? They have asked for the what is the additional tier 1 to support the market risk. They have asked for the additional tier 1 to support the market risk. But in the case of the additional tier 1, it is a maximum percentage that is available. It is a maximum percentage that we go for and not for the minimum one. So it is restricted to what? It is restricted to 1.5. So the market risk weight asset is given to be 100. So it will be 1.5% of 100. So it will be 1.5% of 100, and that would be what? That would be 1.5 itself. So out of this 3.25, so out of this 3.25, only and only 1.5 can be utilized for supporting the market risk. Only and only 1.5 can be utilized for supporting the market risk. Is that clear? So the answer over here would be 1.5. So we can say additional tier 1 for the market risk, it would be 1.5. Is that clear? And after that, we are left with what? We are left with the tier 2 capital. We are left with the tier 2 capital. Okay. And also for the tier 2 capital, it is basically restricted to 2%. It is restricted to the 2%. For the tier 2 capital, it is restricted to 2%. So as per the risk weight assets, it will be basically what? It will be 2% of the 100. The capital required for supporting the market risk, it will be 2% of the 100, that is equal to 2. And further, do we have additional tier 1 from we need to recheck over here. We need to recheck. Why we need to recheck? Because the tier 2 capital which was eligible over here, that was 25, and further which is eligible, tier 2 capital which is eligible over here, that is given to be 28.33. I hope that this might have been some mistake over here, because it should not be 28.33. It should not be 28.33. We can basically think of it like it is given to be 23.33. So let us take the case that the total tier 2 capital eligible is given to be 23.33. Okay. So we will be basically correcting this particular part to be 23.33, because otherwise it does not make any sense. If it is a tier 2 capital which is given over here, it is 25, and the eligible capital cannot be beyond that particular capital. Okay. So in case we have already utilized 24 for the 24 out of the for the operational risk and credit risk. If you remember, we have already utilized the 24 part of the components out of 25 for the operational risk and credit risk supported. Okay. And further, the surplus of the additional tier 1, the surplus of the additional tier 1 is also eligible for the same. It is also eligible for the same. So what was the surplus amount? It was 21.25. It was 21.25 minus 18, that is 3.25, and further 3.25 minus 1.5. So that would be the surplus. So 3.25 minus 1.5, that is basically 1.75 is the surplus over here. And further 1.75 is representing what? It is representing the surplus. Okay. And also we are having the eligible component over here. If we look at the eligible component, what it basically signifies, the eligible component signifies 23.33. So further 23.33 minus plus 1.75. So 23.33 plus 1.75 minus 24 we have already utilized for the operational risk and further the credit risk. So the capital which is basically available over here in this particular relation, it is given to be what? It is given to be 1.08. It comes out to be 1.08, which can be utilized for the market risk purposes. Are you getting this particular point or not? So let me explain to you again. Let me explain it to you again. So we are already provided with the tier 2 capital, and further we have calculated it as 2% of the risk weight assets in the case of the credit and operational risk, and further we calculated it to be 2% of the 1200, and that comes out to be what? That comes out to be 24 in this particular case. Is that clear? But the tier 2 capital which is eligible over here, it is 23.33. It is what? It is a 23.33 that is eligible for it. Okay, I think that that was previously given, right, that it is 28.33, because previously the excess of P and CPS is given to be 3.33. It is given to be 3.33, but that does not make sense over here. So we are taking it as 23.33 only. We are taking it as 23.33 only. Okay, and further you need to also understand that the surplus from the P and CPS, the surplus from the PNCPS from the additional tier 1 also forms a part of the tier 2 capital. It also forms a part of the tier 2 capital. So that we already calculated. So 21.25, that was the eligible additional tier 1 capital, additional tier 1 PNCPS, that was basically this, that is basically 21.25, and further now it is forming part of what, that is forming the surplus for this. Now this is forming surplus of this. So we basically subtracted the 18 and further we got 3.25, and further 1.5 was there for supporting the market risk, and further the surplus is 1.75 over here. That is 1.75 over here, and also we are provided over here excess of the PNCPS for the tier 2, that is specifically for the tier 2 capital, specifically for the tier 2 capital, and further that is also to be added up. So that is also to be added up over here. So we are already having the surplus now, that is 8.8 plus 3, that is 114 plus 5, that is 5.41. So out of this 5.41, how much capital is to be maintained for the supporting the market risk? That is a 2%. So the answer over here will be 2%. I know the numerical was quite simpler enough over here, but we need to get the basics too, because it may be the scenario over there in the question itself where the right capital is not being maintained, and further it may be the case that we are maintaining the lower tier 2 capitals, and that particular regard we have to answer accordingly. In this particular question, it was the surplus over here because it was clearly given excess of the PNCPS or PDF for the tier 2 capital. So we can add it up to the differences over here. Okay, that will be basically making sense over here that we are having the surplus of tier 2, and further only and only the eligible 2% part is to be maintained. Is that clear? Okay. I hope that you must have understood the concept related to it. And further, what is the amount of the total capital for market risk? What is the amount of the total capital for market risk? So that would be basically 19 plus 1.5 plus 2, that is equal to 22.5. That is equal to 22.5 is the capital. 22.5 is the total capital so as to support the market risk. Okay. So that would be the answer related to it. Next, it is related to the third case study, which is computation of capital charge for counterparty credit risk, which is related to what? Which is related to computation of capital charge for counterparty credit risk. Okay. So Bank B purchased a Government of India dated security valued at rupees 10,000. So Bank B purchased a Government of India dated security valued rupees 10,000 having the residual maturity of 5 years, which is having a residual maturity of 5 years, and further coupon at 6% from the Bank C. Coupon at 6% from a Bank C at current market price of 10,500. So Bank B has purchased a Government of India dated security. Bank B has purchased what? Bank B has purchased a Government of India dated security, and further this particular security was amounting 10,000 that was purchased by the Bank B, and Bank B has not purchased it directly. Bank B has purchased it from Bank C at a market price of 10.5 grands, that is 10,500 rupees, and further it is having a residual maturity of 5 years. And further cash borrowed by the bank for this purpose is 10,000 rupees, and also the Bank B has not paid the cash out of its own resources. It has borrowed 10,000 rupees. It has borrowed 10,000 rupees for this particular purpose. The modified duration of the security is given to be 4.5%. The bank holds the security for minimum 5 business days under a repo transaction, and the bank is holding this particular security for at least minimum 5 days under a repo transaction. As per the Reserve Bank of India guidelines, the scaled down haircut for this security is 1.4%, and haircut on cash is given to be 0%. The change in the yield for computing the capital charge for general market risk is 0.7%. Okay, so let me tell you the scenario first of all, that what concepts we are going to use in this particular case. So first of all, it is related to what? It is related to the government securities. So only and only the scheduled commercial bank can basically deal in the government securities, government dated securities. That is the first case. It means what? It means the Bank B and Bank C both both are the compliant banks over here. Both are the compliance bank over here. And further, it is given over here that the bank has paid 10,500. So what is the exposure of security related to bank B over here? That is not the 10,000. That is a 10,500. That is the amount that which is paid by the bank B to bank C so as to purchase the security. Is that clear? And further, here it is a term which is highlighted over here, that is a modified duration. So we've already learned the concepts related to the modified duration. So it is related to what? It is related to the sensitivity. It is related to the sensitivity. So more is the duration, more is the sensitivity. It means more is the volatility, and lesser is the duration means lesser is the sensitivity, lesser is the volatility. That is related to that. And further, the bank is holding it under the Rapport transaction. Now what is Rapport transaction? In that particular case, let us take the case that here we are having two banks. We are considering bank B and bank C again. So bank C is having the surplus securities. Let us just take an instance. This is not related to this particular example. We are just trying to understand the Rapport transaction. Okay. So bank C is having surplus of the securities with it, and further it is in need of the liquidity. It is in the need of the liquidity for the short-term period. So Repo is what? Repo is a money market instrument that is utilized so as to basically the securities would be given, the surplus securities would be given, and the liquidity would be taken, and further the securities would be given within a contract that the particular bank, that the bank C which was having the surplus of the security, there would be a repurchase agreement. There would be a repurchase agreement between the B and C, that C will be purchasing the same securities that it has given to the bank B for the sake of liquidity at some fixed price at some fixed period, but or on some particular date. Is that clear? So that is related to what? That is related to the Rapport transaction, with the bank C which was having the exceeding securities, now needs liquidity, will be basically selling these securities to the bank B over here, and further there will be a contract between these two that the bank C will be repurchasing that particular security after a fixed period for a particular price over there. That is related to what? That is related to the Rapport transaction. Is that clear? Okay, now as per the Reserve Bank of India guidelines, it is clearly said over here, the scaled down haircut for the security is given to be 1.4%. It means what? It means the exposure on the current value itself. Okay, it means the haircut means over here that the additional value over here which is to be added up to the current value of the exposure, and let me tell you one thing. In this particular case, we are having two types of exposure. One, it is a on balance sheet, and other one, it is a off balance sheet exposure. Now in this particular case, if you look at the factor, we are basically dealing with the bank security over here, which is basically on balance sheet, which is basically related to the on balance sheet exposure. But this particular 10,000 rupees which have been borrowed over here, this is also on balance sheet exposure. Now what would be saying the off balance sheet exposure? What would be related to the off balance sheet exposure? Let us take the case that there is no direct outlay of the funds involved. Let us take the case that there is no direct outlay of the funds. Let us as in the case of the letter of credit, or it may be the case of the bank guarantee, or it may be the case of the bank co-acceptances. In all these examples, there is no direct outlay of the funds, and further there the exposure still exists, and that is basically related to what? That is related to the off balance sheet exposure. And for this off balance sheet exposure, if we want to calculate the risk weight assets, how we can do it? We can do it by multiplying it with the credit conversion factor, by the CCR, that is a credit conversion rate or credit conversion factor, that we will be multiplying it with, and we can calculate the exposure related to it. Is that clear? Okay, and further, let me tell you that over here the value is given over here, and what is the formula related to the exposure that we have already calculated? What it is? It is the formula for the net exposure. So E is equal to, which is ranging from 0 to some positive value. So net exposure is never negative. It is either 0 or it is having some positive value. Okay, so it will be basically the maximum of the two, that is 0, or the value that we are going to calculate, that would be the current exposure value, that is a EC, and further 1 plus HE, that is a haircut on exposure, and if there is any collateral, that would be subtracted. And further, if there is any of the haircut available, that is to be subtracted from the collateral value itself. So it will be 1 minus haircut on the collateral, and further if there is any foreign currency translation, that is also to be subtracted. If there is any foreign currency translation, that is also to be subtracted. That is represented by HFX. That is represented by HFX, and that is how we basically calculate the net exposure. That is how we calculate the net exposure. Is that clear? So there are different terms related to it. We have already gone through this particular formula in the previous case studies that we have covered. So net exposure is equal to, first of all, I told you that value ranges from 0 to some positive value. So it can never be negative. And further, EC is related to what? EC is related to the current exposure value. That is, in this particular case, it is 10,500. It is a 10,500. Is that clear? And further, we are going to multiply it with 1 plus HE. Now that is what? That is a haircut on exposure. That would be added up to the exposure value itself. So over here it is given to be what? It is given to be, it is scaled down haircut value of the security is 1.4%. It is it is how much? It is 1.4% in this particular case. Is that clear? It is given to be what? It is given to be 1.4%. So we will be adding up this particular value. And further, the collateral value over here in this particular case, what it is? The collateral value over here, it is what it is? It is a 10,000 now. It is how much? It is a 10,000 in this particular case. Are you getting this particular point? In this particular case, we are having the collateral. We are basically, are we having any kind of collateral over here? Kindly please let me know. So jaldi se jaldi do confirm over here. Do we have any kind of collateral in this particular case that we need to subtract from this? Kindly do answer at the earliest. Do we have any kind of collateral in this particular case? So in this particular case, the balance sheet credit exposure for this particular purpose, for this investment, it would be 10,500. That is the value of the collateral. So that is the value of the net collateral value. And further, the haircut adjusted value is to be added up. That is 1.4% over here, or we can simply rewrite it as 1.014, because we will be converting into decimal part. 1.4% is to be converted into decimal part, so it will be 0.014. That will be added up to 1 over here. That is 1.014 is will be added up, and that would be the value of the haircut adjusted exposure value. That would be the haircut adjusted exposure value. And further, collateral for security lent in cash is basically what? That is basically 10,000, because basically you have basically used this particular security as a collateral so as to get the liquidity under the Rapport transaction. Are you getting this particular point? So what is the value of the collateral that you are getting at this particular point? It is 10,000 itself. It is what? It is a 10,000 itself in this particular case. So the collateral that we can say it is 10,000 in this particular case. And further, is there any haircut available in this particular case? Is there any haircut available in this particular case? Kindly please do answer at the earliest. There is no haircut available, because it is clearly said over here that on cash the haircut is 0%. On cash the haircut is 0%, and also there is no any foreign exchange translation haircut available. So it is simply 10,000 will be subtracted from here. So what will be the answer related to it? So the net exposure over here would be equal to what? It would be equal to 10,500 multiplied by 1.014. So 10,000 multiplied by 1.014, that comes out to be 10,500 multiplied by 1.014, that comes out to be 10,647. Minus the 10,000, that is the value of the collateral, and the answer would be equal to 647. And the net exposure comes out to be 647 in this particular case. Is that clear? So that is how we just calculated the exposure value over here. So there are two terms in the exposure formula. One, it is related to the current exposure, and the haircut that would be added up to the current exposure value. And further, then it is a haircut related to the collateral that is to be subtracted from the value of the collateral itself. Okay. So in the case of the cash, because we basically on the basis of this particular security, we are getting the cash value. We are getting the cash value, and further on cash, no haircut is available. So our net exposure would be basically 10,647 minus the 10,000 rupees, that was the cash available, and for the 647 is our net exposure in this particular case. Now let us have a look at the questions based upon this. Now what is the exposure adjusted for haircut? When they ask for the exposure adjusted for haircut, they are only and only interested in this particular value that we have already calculated. So it is what? It is EC into 1 plus HE, that is 10,647 we calculated. How we calculated it? So the net value, so the current value was 10,500 that we purchased at, and further it is 1 plus 0.14%. It is 1 plus 1.4%, that is a 0.014. 1.4%, so it is equal to 0.014. So we just already calculated that and it came out to be 10,647. So they are just interested in the exposure adjusted for haircut. Exposure adjusted for haircut. Okay, so when we have just added up the haircut value to the exposure, that would be 640, that would be 147 that we added up to the 10,500, and that basically amounts to 10,647. So for the question number 1, the answer would be 10,647. Is that clear? Okay, and the next question says, what is the amount of net exposure? What is the amount of net exposure? So we basically subtracted the collateral value that we were having at the 0% haircut, that is in the form of the cash. So we basically subtracted the 10,647, 10,000 from the 10,647, and the net exposure is 647. So I can do rewrite over here. So I can say the haircut adjusted exposure value, it is basically 10,647, and further the net exposure, it is equal to 647 only. It is a 647 only. Now let's move further to the third question, which says, what is the risk weight value of the asset? What is the risk weight value of the asset? Now, as per the, if you have invested into the securities, the risk weightage with those securities associated to be 20%. As prescribed by under the standardized approach by the Reserve Bank of India, it is a 20%. So the risk weight asset associated with the government security, it is a 20%. So in this particular case also it is a 20%. So what it would be? So the answer would be the risk weighted asset is to be maintained for the net exposure only. So let me tell you, it is to be maintained for the net exposure only. So it will be maintained as a 647 into 20%. It will be maintained as a 647 into 20%, that we can easily calculate. So it will be 647 into 20%, and that comes out to be 129.4. So the risk weight asset for this particular purpose, it is 129.4. Okay, so the capital is to be maintained for 129.4% for the 129.4 value only. So in the next question it is said, what is the amount of capital charge for the counterparty credit risk? What is the amount of the capital charge for the counterparty credit risk? So now in the case of the government dated securities, the counterparty is whom? The counterparty is the government itself. The counterparty is the government itself. So is there exist any kind of the credit risk? There will be no credit risk existing in this particular case. There will be no credit risk existing in this particular case. So if it is said over here that what is the amount of capital charge, what is the amount of the capital charge over here for this particular purpose, what would be the answer? Is there any credit risk associated with this? We need to answer it particularly. Is there any credit risk associated with this particular purpose? So the answer over here would be no credit risk associated, because it is related to whom? It is related to the government security. You are dealing with the government itself. So there is no counterparty credit risk over there. There is no counterparty credit risk over there in this particular case. Is that clear? But there is a risk weight asset associated with it. There is a risk weight asset associated with it, and for that risk weight asset, there we need to maintain the counterparty credit risk capital. We need to maintain the counterparty credit risk capital, and that would be related to what? That would be 129.4 multiplied by 9%. as per the CAR, which is minimum to be maintained at 9%, we will be calculating. So it will be 129.4 multiplied by 9%, and it comes out to be 11.65. It comes out to be 11.65 in this particular case. It comes out to be 11.65. That is a capital to be maintained for the capital charge to be maintained for the counterparty credit risk. Is that clear? Next question, it says, what is the amount of capital charge for market risk? What is the amount of capital charge to be maintained for the market risk? Now, as we are dealing with the government itself, so market risks are two types. Market risks are of two types. One, it is a specific market risk. If we talk about the market risk, it is basically categorized as the specific market risk related to some specific party. And the other one, it is a general market risk. Now we are dealing with government itself, so there is not existing any kind of the specific market risk. So the specific market risk is not existing in this particular case. And further, if we want to calculate the general market risk, the formula related to it is basically equal to what? There the formula, it says it is related to the modified duration. It will be equal to modified duration multiplied by the yield change, multiplied by the yield change, and multiplied by the market value of the security, multiplied by the market value of the security. Okay, so that will be the formula. So if we look at the question itself, we are already provided with the modified duration. We are already provided over here with the modified duration. So modified duration over here, it is given to be 4.5 years. So the modified duration is given to be 4.5 years. And further, the yield change, the change in yield for computing the capital charge for general market risk, it is given to be 0.7. So it is given to be 0.7%. And further, the market value is 10,500. So the capital charge to be maintained for the general market risk, we can calculate it to be 4.5 multiplied by 0.7 multiplied by 10,500, and the answer comes out to be 10,500 multiplied by 0.7 multiplied by the 4.5. And further, we need to calculate the answer related to that particular thing. We can easily calculate it, and that would be basically 4.5 multiplied by 0.7%. So 4.5 multiplied by the 0.7%. So kindly please do let me know the answer. 4.5 multiplied by the 0.7%. That comes out to be 330.75. That comes out to be 330.75. So that was a percentage that we need to calculate over here. So that comes out to be 330.75. That is a capital charge to be maintained for the general market risk. So the capital charge for the general market risk is to be maintained as 330.75. Is that clear? So the formula related to it is a modified duration into the yield change for the general market risk multiplied by the duration, and it comes out to be 330.75. So how we just solved it? It is as simple. You just need to calculate 10,500 into 4.5 multiplied by 0.7%, and it is 330.75. It is a 330.75. Is that clear? Okay. The next question over here, that is a question number 6 over here in this particular says, what is the amount of capital required for credit risk and market risk? What is the amount of the capital required for the credit risk and the market risk? So for credit risk itself, no credit risk was existing, but the counterparty credit risk was there. That is the CCR was there. The CCR was there, which we calculated it to be 11.65 if you remember. And for the market risk, we calculated it for the general market risk, that we calculated as 330.75. So the total capital that is to be maintained for the credit risk and market risk, that would be equal to 11.65 plus 330.75, that comes out to be 342.4. That comes out to be 342.4. So this is the capital amount that is to be maintained for the credit risk and market risk. Okay, so that would be related to this particular video. I hope that you must have learned the concepts related to this particular thing. I know the subject is quite new to you, but before we just proceed, I just made you to understand the basics related to it. So I'm hoping that you must have understood the concepts well.